Hi everyone, welcome to Beyond the Evidence. This is the channel where justice matters. My name is Marv. I am a true crime fanatic, and I love to dig deeper into the mysteries of unsolved cases. Join me as we search for missing persons, uncover the clues in unsolved murders, follow along with jury trials, and we'll be a voice for the voiceless. I'll share with you the facts, the theories, the clues, the evidence, and the controversies that surround these cases. This is Beyond the Evidence. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Rescue all the dogs once again. First in chat. Hope everyone's having a good day. I've got my liquid ready. I am going to start reading the testimony of Warden John Galipeau given at the hearing on motion to suppress held July 31st, 2024. This is a lot of pages, and there is going to be some content warning on this. Some of it's not pretty. So, Scarlet Letter, how are you? Hello. Teresa the Troll, hello. All right. I'm just getting my screen situated here so that I can see chat and see my document. Okay. So once again, this is the testimony of Warden John Galipeau given at hearing of motion to suppress held July 31st, 2024. Rescue. Do you want help? Read. Andrea's going to be coming on in a little bit. She is making dinner real quick. She just got home from an appointment. Hi, Phil. How are you? Okay. Let's get started here, and then Andrea will join when she's done with supper. So this is the direct examination of Warden John Galipeau proceedings. Attorney Bradley Rozzi. I would call John Galipeau. Witness sworn. Mr. Rozzi, may I? The court, you may. Direct examination of Warden Galipeau. What's your name? John Galipeau. Question. And we've met before, right, Warden? Answer. Correct. Question. 3 or 4 times now, I think, right? Answer. Correct. Question. And tell the judge where you work. Answer. Currently, I work at LaPorte Juvenile Correctional Facility. Question. Okay. And how long have you been at in what capacity are you employed in LaPorte? Answer. I'm the warden at LaPorte Juvenile. Question. All right. And how long have you been with the DOC? Answer. Approximately 28 years. Question. Okay, Mr. Rozzi, the sound is, we're getting like that. Court reporter, if he can move the microphone away, the witness away, the court. Oh, just move the microphone away, okay? Question. Warden, the court. Yeah, and I think if you just speak up loud, it will capture you. Question. We're still experiencing with a new system here, so bear with us. Answer, I will. Question, you said you've been with the DOC for about 28 years. Answer, correct. Question, and you were previously the warden at Westville, is that correct? Answer, I should say, you were the warden at Westerville, is that right? Answer, correct. Question, and how long were you the warden at Westerville? Answer, approximately 5 years. Question, and when was it that you left Westville and went to your current position? Answer, I believe I started at LaPorte beginning of February, so 8 months roughly. Question, and you suggested to me previously, did you not, that you basically had a lateral, I think that was the way you defined it, a lateral transfer? Answer, a reassignment. Question, okay, you went from supervising, is it fair to say you went from supervising about 2,300 inmates down to 60? Answer, about 2,800 inmates to right around 55. Question, so 2,800 adult felons at Westville, roughly? Answer, correct. Question, and now you're supervising 60 teenage females in LaPorte, right? Answer, currently 54. Yes. Question, 54? Thank you. And you recall me taking your deposition back on March 22nd of 2024? Answer, I do. Oh, here's Andrea. Let's bring her on. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm here. He decided he wasn't hungry right now, so.
Oh, okay.
Okay, fine.
So you're going to be...
Questions?
Yep.
You're on page 5, right?
I am.
What line?
Number 8.
Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I ask you, do you recall me asking you questions about Mr. Allen's safekeeping order and generally how familiar you were with those circumstances?
Correct.
Did you tell me that you were not aware of any other circumstance in the time that you had been at the DOC where someone in his situation had been confined on a solitary basis?
Confined on a solitary basis? We have 255 on a solitary basis. It was the first safekeeper I said that I've had.
Yes.
Yes.
So you told me that this is the first time you've even been in a situation involving a safekeeper in Richard Allen's circumstances?
Yes, this is the first one I've been involved with.
28 years.
Correct.
And one of your responsibilities, is it fair to say that one of your responsibilities as the warden is to manage the custodial staff and the inmates at the prison?
That's correct, yes.
And that would include having knowledge of what kind of offenders are being housed there, safekeepers, those types of things?
Basic knowledge, yes.
And do you agree that Mr. Allen was held at your facility in Westville for the better part of a year?
Yes, I would concede to that. Maybe a little longer.
I'm just kind of estimating here, but basically November of 2022 through early December of 2023. Does that sound right?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
And is it true that during that time that he was either on constant watch or on close supervision?
Or neither. Correct.
There were times when he was on neither of those?
Yes, there were times where he was off mental health orders.
Altogether?
Correct.
Do you agree that during Mr. Allen's detention at your facility that he was afforded very little privacy?
He was afforded very little privacy. Yes, I would concede to that.
It would be reasonable to say that he had no privacy. Is that correct?
At time periods.
Well, let's just start out the obvious. His cell, if you recall, you said it was an 8.5 by 12.5 foot cell. Is that right?
Correct.
And that cell, is it accurate to say it was contained in a maximum security unit within the penitentiary itself?
That is correct.
If I say it was in a prison within a prison, is that a pretty nice way of describing the facility or WCU where he was housed?
It's a fair description.
A lot of acronyms in this business, right?
There is.
But the WCU is the way you describe the unit where he was housed?
Correct.
Tell the judge what that acronym is.
WCU or MCC, Maximum Control Complex.
And what's the W? Where did that come from?
WCU, Westville Control Unit.
Westville Control Unit.
Correct.
Thank you. And so that unit is a unit with inside the prison where basically you have to go through another set of fences and then into a confined unit to access Mr. Allen, right?
That is correct.
And is it true that during his entire stay at the facility that he had a video camera installed in his cell?
That is correct.
And that particular cell, well, you'll have to correct me. I think it was A107.
That is correct.
That cell, is it fair to say, is used for specific purposes?
Yes.
And one of those purposes is that it was used for monitoring suicidal offenders?
That is true.
Is it also accurate that cell was situated in a unit where there are a number of other confinement cells?
55.
And those are all very similar in terms of their characteristics, right?
All the same except for the bed. Yes.
Same size, same, I was going to say amenities. That's probably not the right word, but in general.
Same dimensions.
Same dimensions?
Yep.
So basically, he's in a suicide observation cell, but his neighbor right next door, a few feet, is in a cell just like the one he's in?
Correct.
But he gets a camera. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
And that camera basically is focused on his cell 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
Yes, sir.
And that camera, is it accurate to say that that camera was recording his movements, activities, and everything that he did in that cell during those times?
That is correct.
And just to be clear, so the judge is aware, that camera, is it fair to say, did not have audio? It's just video?
That is correct. No audio.
And did you then instruct Ms. Maps, one of the employees at the prison, to preserve all of that video?
Yes.
And so that happened early on in Mr. Allen's stay that you instructed her to do that?
I'm not sure when it happened, but yeah.
What were your intentions of having her preserve all of that video?
Just for proceedings just like this.
Okay.
Just so we could have, knowledge of, be transparent.
Purposes of litigation, right?
Or just to be transparent, yeah, to capture anything that may have happened.
Well, when you say proceedings just like this, you're talking about us being here in a courtroom.
That is one of them.
Okay.
Correct.
We were talking about privacy. Do you agree that even when Mr. Allen would use the restroom, that whether it be a number one or a number two, so to speak, that would be on video?
Correct. It would be.
Do you agree that there were lights on in this observation cell throughout his stay at Westville?
Correct.
And in fairness, there's a window in the cell, right?
There was.
Do you recall us talking about that in our deposition?
Briefly.
If I describe the window as kind of a window slit, if you will, is that a pretty good way of describing it?
It is. I would describe it probably 5 feet by 10 inches, maybe.
So pretty narrow, but it's taller than it is wide, right?
Yes, sir.
And from what I could see on the video when I was watching, the bottom of that window is actually elevated quite a bit in that room, maybe face level or higher, right?
I would say so, yes.
So the higher portion of the window you really can't see because you inaudible, right?
No, the window probably starts, I would say waist high, maybe.
Do you recall specifically Mr. Allen's window being damaged when he was moved into that cell?
I remember it being scratched.
And then it had to be replaced?
We replaced it, yes.
Is it fair to say there are policies regarding the amount of recreation that Mr. Allen would get while in that setting?
Correct.
And you told me in part of the deposition that he would get 3 to 4 1-hour sessions a week. Is that right?
I think they're allotted 5. Yeah.
In depositions, you told me 3 to 4.
I believe they're allotted 5.
So did you go back and check the policy since I last talked to you?
No, I believe they're allotted 5.
Very well. So 5 1-hour sessions.
Correct.
All right.
When available.
And do you acknowledge that there are times when those sessions can be curtailed because he is on some other form of watch, whether it be constant or close supervision?
Correct. Or refusals.
And do you acknowledge that there were long periods of time while Mr. Allen was detained in Westville when, in fact, he was on either constant or close watch?
Yes, and I'm not sure the duration he was on them, but he was on both those.
And in fact, do you acknowledge that when he showed up at the prison doorstep, so to speak, in November of 2022, that he was immediately placed on suicide watch?
I don't recall whether he was placed on suicide watch. If he was, it's because he was on suicide watch as he was transferred to us. I'm not sure when Westville put him on suicide watch.
Okay, very good. Do you recall that he was placed on suicide watch roughly from about April the 1st of 2023 through the rest of his stay, December the 5th, I believe, of 2024?
There was intermittent periods where he was on or off. So I'm not sure of the exact dates when he was on or off, but it was intermittent.
Thank you for that. The point being that when you're on this particular watch, then some of your privileges can be cut off, right?
That is true if he's on constant.
Let's talk about Mr. Allen's visitation at the prison, okay?
Yes, sir.
Do you acknowledge that when there were visits with his lawyers and his family that he was transported by a number of guards?
Yes, sir.
Do you acknowledge that he was fully shackled when that occurred?
I do.
And when we describe the shackles, we're talking about handcuffs, right?
Correct.
And those handcuffs are a little different than just a regular traditional set of handcuffs. They're box cuffs, right?
Well, the handcuffs are the same. They just place a box over the handcuffs.
Okay, hang on. Where did I just go? Okay, very good. Thank you for the technical explanation. So traditional handcuffs with a box in them, right?
Correct.
And the box makes them more restrictive.
Correct.
Do you acknowledge that he also had a belly chain on him when he was transported?
That'd be standard.
And do you acknowledge that he had ankle shackles on or foot shackles when he was transported?
Yes, sir.
Do you acknowledge that he also had I don't want to get too technical here, but the belly chain is hooked to the box cuffs, right?
Correct.
So you can really move your hands. You can't really move your hands.
You can move them. They're designed for transportation. So you can eat with them. You could go to the bathroom with them.
Well, you have to unhook them from the belly chain to eat, right?
No.
You don't have to?
No, sir.
Do you acknowledge that he also was essentially walked around with I called it a leash, you called it a lead, but it looks like a leash, right?
It is a lead.
Just like you would use with a dog.
No, it's a...
Has a little hook on the end with a ring?
It's a security lead. Correct.
Transported with that, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, you acknowledge that every time that you moved Mr. Allen out of his cell, that there was, strike that. Let me rephrase the question. Do you acknowledge that a majority of the times that you moved Mr. Allen out of his cell, that you used a video camera to record those movements?
It should have been every time. Yes, sir.
I wasn't sure when it started, so I didn't want to force it to a technical error.
Right.
So you think it was every time?
When the order came down, it was every time, yes. I'm not sure when that was started, but it wasn't too long after he got there.
And so essentially, while he was being walked to the shower, he had a video camera on him.
Correct.
While he was being walked to see his lawyer, Mr. Baldwin and I, he had a video camera on him.
Yes, sir.
Actually assigned an individual to do just that.
Yes, sir.
And there were even occasions when his lawyers would meet with him. Do you acknowledge when you were video cameraing or videoing these meetings?
Yes, sir.
Now, in fairness, it was not in the room, correct?
Correct.
But the video camera was located directly outside of the window, very near where his lawyers were then.
Correct.
Do you acknowledge that that video camera was pointed directly at Mr. Allen as he was communicating with his lawyers?
I would hope so. I'm not sure how it was pointed, but that's the intent.
And that he was required to sit in certain spots that would be for him, certain chairs.
Correct.
So that video could be affixed on him firmly.
When he was on a suicide watch, correct.
And during these meetings, he was fully shackled as you described earlier, right?
I'm not sure if I know he was unshackled during his visitations.
What about the meetings with his lawyers?
I'm not sure. I don't recall. I didn't walk him down there.
Did you ever look at any of the video?
Not that video, no.
Not any of the video?
Not with the attorneys, no.
Not by yourself?
Never.
You mentioned his visitation and you thought he was unshackled just a second ago, right?
He was.
Let's educate the judge about that. So he was taken to visitation in the shackled manner that we discussed. Is that accurate?
He was transported there, correct.
And then when he got there, there actually is a process where you go through that's called the changing of wardrobes.
Correct.
And he was allowed to sit at a table during that visit, right?
He was.
And his wife he was allowed a brief embrace with her. Is that accurate?
I believe so, yes.
And do you acknowledge that the two of them were required to sit at a specific table in that visitation room?
That's policy, yes.
And do you acknowledge that that visitation room was basically empty with the exception of a couple lawyers and some prison guards?
It was empty because we made accommodations for Mr. Allen, correct.
And do you acknowledge that there were prison guards that were located near him while he visited with his wife?
Absolutely.
And are basically sitting on each end of him as he sat and talked to his wife?
Well, they were in the room. I'm not sure they were standing, but they were in the room.
Well, we've talked about this before, haven't we? When I took your deposition.
I'm not sure we talked about this specifically, but
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
I don't know if we talked about this specifically, but there's guards in every visitation room.
All right. Well, there are guards located around the visitation. Is that right?
Correct.
Those people could overhear the things that were being said in the room with him.
I don't know where they were standing at.
Do you acknowledge that he was not given the basic provision of water during those visits?
There's no water during visits.
There what?
There's no water during visits.
So the answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Visits.
There is a water fountain in that room, isn't there?
There is.
But it's just right next to where he was sitting.
There is.
And there are vending machines in the room.
Also true.
And when other inmates have visitations, their family members get to buy things for them, don't they?
I believe $4 or $5, correct.
Well, there's like 10 vending machines in there, right?
There is.
So having something to drink in that room is not a novel idea, is it?
Having something to drink in that Nobody from Westville gets water in there.
Okay.
Visits tend to be an hour long. I think we granted Mr. Allen 2-hour visits.
His wife didn't get any water either, did she?
No, sir, not that I recall.
Pretty reasonable request, though.
It's policy, sir.
I'm sorry?
I said it's policy.
Policy?
Yes, sir.
So you can have a Pepsi, but you can't have water.
Correct.
All right.
You're not allowed to get up is probably why that's there. You're not allowed to use the restroom. You're not allowed to use water. You're not allowed to get up and walk around. Your visitors can, but the inmate cannot.
So there's no reason why she shouldn't have been able to get a drink.
I'm not sure.
Do you recall that during Rick's stay at that unit that there were tasers that were used to assist with his detention?
I recall 2 incidents, yes.
And do you recall that those incidents basically involved a situation where he was placed back in his confinement cell and wouldn't remove his hands from the cuff ports?
That is correct.
So to educate the judge again, the cuff port is the phrase that you use for the slit in the door where you put the inmate's food?
Correct.
Or pass other items to the inmate without opening the door, right?
Yes.
And that cuff port, actually, I looked it up on the internet the other day to see. I thought it was like a 5x10 portal or something. Is that generally?
I don't know the dimensions of it. I would guess, just guessing, probably 3 foot in diameter, 8 inches high.
When I say 5x10, I'm talking inches too, just to be clear. You think it's about 3 foot wide?
Probably, yeah.
But that's what you use too for taking handcuffs off and things like that, right?
And pass food.
We're talking about the use of force. Is it accurate to say that the 2 times that the taser was at least deployed was because he wouldn't take his hands out of the cuff port, right?
Correct.
And I suggested, why don't you just walk away for a second until he takes his hands out and then close the door, right? Remember we suggested that to you?
I remember the suggestion.
And what was your answer?
I don't know what my answer was, but my answer today was that would be dangerous to leave the cuff port open.
Because he was some threat to these officers?
He could be, yeah.
I mean, he's in the most confined place in your entire prison, right?
All 255 cuff ports are shut.
But do you agree that he was in the most confined cell in your entire prison?
Same cell, just with a camera.
Did he have any track record at all of doing anything to harm any of the guards?
Not that I
leading up to those circumstances?
Not that I recall.
So he wasn't a threat to anybody, was he?
There was some non-compliance, but not a threat, no.
So when you don't comply, you get punished by getting tased. Is that what you're saying?
If we can't secure your door, yes.
Now, let's talk about statements made by Mr. Allen. You told me that you heard him make some incriminating statements. I think you told me about 3 to 5 different times when you were at the prison.
Roughly.
And those all occurred at the cell door. Is that accurate?
Either through the cell door or through written communication.
Well, I'm talking about what you heard.
Yes, through the cell door.
And do you acknowledge that those communications also occurred when someone else from the prison, whether an inmate companion or a guard, was present?
Yes, sir.
And you told me that you never documented any of this stuff, right?
I did not.
But that those interactions would have been documented by either a prison or a guard.
They could have been, yeah.
And I think what you told me was, forgive me if I'm wrong, but those statements that he made were what I'm going to call, my term, generic statements, basically. I killed those 2 girls.
They were a little, he mentioned them by name.
Okay, he mentioned them by name. Nothing, there was no detail involved in the statements, right? Other than that?
No, sir.
Now, you were aware, were you aware that there was an active law enforcement investigation ongoing while he was detained in your prison?
I wasn't aware of it.
You didn't know that?
It wouldn't surprise me, but I wasn't aware of it.
Are you aware that law enforcement officers were coming into your facility during his stay at Westville and interviewing your guards and inmate companions?
I don't recall them interviewing any inmates.
Okay.
No,
You don't have any knowledge of that.
no.
If that were happening, would you expect that that would be something that you would have knowledge of?
I would hope so, yes.
Do you have any recollection of any police officers coming into the facility to talk to anybody about Rick Allen's detention circumstances between November of 2022 and December of 2023?
The only law enforcement that I can't even remember his name, but came into my office and spoke to me briefly, but I don't remember anyone interviewing guards or inmates there. No.
I couldn't hear. What'd you say at the end?
I said I don't remember any law enforcement coming in and interviewing Mr. Allen or guards. No.
Give me 1 second. I need to look real quick. Let's just talk about prison life in general. You'd acknowledge that living in prison can be really tough on people.
It can be uncomfortable.
And especially on their mental state.
Sure.
That detaining someone in a secure unit like the WCU can be even tougher on an inmate.
Some prefer it, so.
But it can be tougher on an inmate.
Sure.
For those who don't prefer it.
Concede to that.
Was there ever any suggestion from Rick Allen while he was there that he preferred to be in that confinement cell?
No, not that I'm aware.
Thank you. You acknowledged to me in the deposition, I think the phrase was a major adjustment for somebody in their life, right?
Sure.
Especially if you've never been in prison before.
Correct.
Are you aware that Rick Allen has not one speck of criminal history before he walked into your facility?
I don't know his background.
Let's talk about the inmate companion program, okay?
Sure.
You guys refer to it, your staff members refer to it as the suicide companion program. Is that right?
Correct.
Is that the technical phrase?
It's one of the phrases. Suicide companion. Yeah.
Is it accurate to say that basically there are employees at your facility that recruit inmates to participate in this program?
I don't know if we recruit them. They come from the Plus program.
Okay, Plus program is a program in the prison that offers inmates up an opportunity to engage in positive activities, right?
Correct.
I'm talking pretty broadly here, but that's generally accurate.
Yes.
With those activities can come time cuts and things that they can do to get out earlier. Is that fair?
I don't know if they involve time cuts. I'm not really sure. I don't know if they do or not. It's Plus is a purposeful living unit.
So it's a unit. Is it kind of like a trustee unit where you've got people that garner a little bit more trust than normal?
In theory, yeah.
And these people are still convicted felons, right?
Correct.
And those convictions, is it accurate to say, can include anything from murder down to theft?
I would suppose.
And everything in between.
Sure.
And so one of the incentives, is it accurate to say that one of the incentives for getting into this program would be you get to be in this other dorm, the Plus unit or whatever you call it?
I couldn't hear you. Say that again, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is it accurate to say that one of the incentives of being in the suicide companion program is that you get to live in the Plus house, the Plus dorm?
That's one of them, sure.
It's a better place to live than being in general population, right?
I mean, it's the most crowded place to live.
Well, but the amenities are better. They get more privileges?
No.
Then why would people want to live in there rather than living in the general population?
To be around more positive people.
It's a different unit altogether, though, right?
Correct.
Different set of walls?
Yes, sir.
And these companions, one of their responsibilities is that they would sit at the door of someone, an inmate, another inmate, and basically engage in observations, right?
Correct.
And is it accurate to say that they're given paper and pens and things of that nature to assist in that process?
Yes.
And is it accurate to say that the companion program is really set up for that purpose, to help you monitor other inmates?
Yes.
You being the custodial staff, right?
Correct. I mean, custodial staff still check them. They still do their normal rounds. They just don't ignore and say to the companion, just, you have the individual, and we're not gonna, while they're checking them. So, I mean, we still do our normal rounds.
I understand that. Thank you. So you've got a guard in the unit, but basically you've got this companion sitting at the doorstep. That's my phrase, at the door of the inmate making these observations.
Yes, sir.
I think you told me at one point they're like 5-minute observations. Is that accurate?
It depends what they're on. Close, constant, 15-minute check.
Would Rick have been on those observations at times during his stay?
Intermittently, yes.
And they're essentially reporting what he's doing, right?
Yes.
And I've read the log sheets.
Sure.
They might even report that he's doing nothing, right?
Fair to say.
What he's saying, they record that?
Yes.
The way he's acting?
Yes.
Emotions are even communicated in some of these sheets.
Probably.
In terms of being on formal suicide watch, is it fair to say, is it accurate to say that mental health makes that decision?
Correct.
Is that in consultation with you as the warden?
No.
I might have asked you this question earlier, so forgive me, but do you acknowledge that Rick Allen was on suicide watch at times in your penitentiary when he was not suicidal?
I'm not a mental health professional, so they give the orders. We follow them.
You don't know that?
No.
Would you defer to Dr. Walla with regard to that issue?
No.
She wouldn't have information about whether or not he was on suicide watch?
She would write the orders and we'd follow them.
Okay, maybe the word I used was the wrong one. Let me ask you this. Do you agree that she would be a better source of information about when he was on suicide watch and when he was not?
Yes, they're her orders.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Some of those prison companions were people that were convicted of crimes of dishonesty. Is that accurate?
I would suppose. I'm not sure what they were committed for.
Theft, fraud, forgery, those kind of things?
Supposedly, yes.
Well, do you have those kind of people in the prison?
We do.
And the rules regarding the companions, do you acknowledge prohibit communications between the companion and the inmate?
Yes.
There's no doubt that the companions aren't supposed to be discussing legal matters with the inmates, right?
Correct.
Did you ever discover that there were companions that were talking to Rick Allen about his circumstances, whether personal or legal?
I was not aware of any. No.
Have you never read or are you aware of the transcribed statement of the inmate Lacey Patton Jr.?
Don't even know who he is.
So the answer is no.
The answer is no.
Are you aware or have you been privy to the transcribed statement of inmate Jason Elliott?
Not sure who he is either, sir. So the answer is no.
To the extent that those statements were provided or were given to law enforcement, you don't have any knowledge of it. Is that accurate?
That's true.
I read a statement from Lacey Patton that I've given to the court previously, and in that statement, Mr. Patton admitted that he communicated with his child's mother and his family about Rick's confessions. Let's just hypothetically assume that that's true. Would that be an appropriate thing for an inmate companion to do?
Assuming it's true, probably not. No, they're not supposed to have any communication.
Do you agree that that would be in violation of the inmate companion rules?
Yes.
Same question with regard to Jason Elliott. He would have done the same.
Correct.
Do you believe that that would be a violation of Rick's privacy rights within the prison under your policies?
If a companion was talking to him?
Was talking to their family about what he was saying. Attorney Stacy Diener, may I ask a qualifying question, Judge? The court, you may. Ms. Diener, Warden Galippo, does the prison or DOC as a whole have a confidentiality policy for prisoners?
I'm unaware.
Ms. Diener, thank you.
I'm not sure, ma'am.
Ms. Diener, I'd object to the question. The court, any response? Mr. Razi, I'm sorry, Judge. The court, any response? Mr. Razi, no. The court, okay, sustained. Are you aware that the Inmate Companion Program has a set of rules?
I'm not sure what the rules are. I would hope so.
So you don't even really know?
No, sir.
Do you acknowledge that the inmate companions would fill out these log sheets? You called them bed boards, I think was the phrase I remember. And then those would be secured in a location within the prison.
Yes, sir.
I think you told me in some box or something, didn't you?
I believe so. Yeah, they were put in a box.
And where and what was the ultimate destination of those log sheets?
They would go to Dr. Walla. They'd be filed in his medical record and probably case notes uploaded in the ERM. Or
I have received
uploaded in the EMR.
We have received those, Mr. Allen, through the course of discovery from the state. Can you tell the judge how it is that those log sheets got from your prison to law enforcement?
I can't answer that, no.
Who at your prison could have given them that?
I'm not sure how they got to law enforcement. I couldn't answer that. Maybe through subpoena. Our process is we collect the suicide companion logs, which are different from the door sheets. They got in a secure box. Dr. Walla would pick them up. She would put them in Mr. Allen's medical record and upload it into the emergency record service.
So if it turns out that the evidence suggests that those did land in the hands of law enforcement, would you agree that it wasn't at your command?
Not at mine, no.
And it wasn't at your approval?
Not at mine, no, sir.
Because if things like that are getting out of the prison, private information like that, you would be approving to that, right?
I would hope so.
And you didn't in this case?
Had no knowledge of it.
Did you ever request that Rick Allen permission, either written or verbal, to release any of those records to anyone outside of the prison?
I released those records to the central office. That's the only people that we release them to.
Now, to make sure I understand this, you told me earlier you released them to Dr. Walla.
Dr. Walla collects them.
Okay.
So if we got a request, those documents would be turned over to central office.
Did you get a request?
Yes, but not from law enforcement. No.
From the central office?
Correct.
And so you gave them to the central office?
Correct.
Do you suspect that maybe, just opinion here, that the central office might have given them to law enforcement?
It's possible.
Did anybody ever tell you that, hey, the cops want these records? Would you get them to central office, central administration?
I just gave them to the central office as advised. I have no idea how they got into any law enforcement's hands.
But there was a trail of these records being processed from the doorstep of Rick's cell, at least to the central office, that you're familiar with?
I'm not sure what records would be kept at central office.
Maeve, I didn't ask a very good question. Maybe I didn't ask a very good question.
All right.
I'm sorry, I'm going to withdraw the question. Do you agree that there is a chain of custody, we might call it, of the records that were created at the cell, at Rick Allen's cell, by your companions or your guards, and those records ultimately made it into the central office?
Sure. I'm not sure about if there's a chain of custody filled out.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, you don't really know where they were during this time in the middle of that process, right?
I mean, when I turn them over to central office, I don't know if Internal Affairs turned them over central office, but there was a request made to gather those documents, and that's what we did.
Do you know who had access to those documents between the time they were created by the author and the time that they made it to central office?
No.
Did you ever require anyone from law enforcement to get a court order to obtain any of these records?
I did not.
Did you get any requests from media representatives to get those records?
I never dealt with the media in this case.
When you released those records to central office, did you report any of that to Mr. Allen? Like, hey, I'm just letting you know we've released your records to another office or agency or anything like that?
No,
You didn't seek any kind of consents from him at any point while he was there to release those records?
no, they stayed within our agency.
Let's talk about the guards that were assigned to Rick's cell, okay?
Sure,
Do you recall us talking about your decision generally to assign those guards to the cell?
I do.
And is it accurate to say that you did that when you believed that Mr. Allen was starting to engage in some, what I think you called bizarre behaviors?
That is correct.
And that was in April of 2023.
I'm not sure, but I do recall.
That sound about right?
It could be. I'm not sure.
Mr. Rossi, 1 second, Your Honor. When was that? When was it that you left the prison? Was it February of 2024?
I believe so, yes.
I'm going to just try to get acclimated to time and place. He was transported out December of 2023, correct? To Wabash Valley?
I believe it was sometime in December. Not sure of the exact date, but yeah.
When you made this decision with regard to the guards, can you estimate about what time frame that was during his stay at your prison?
I made the decision to put the guards on his cell the day after he received his legal mail. So whatever that date was, I'm not sure, but that's the exact date.
Do you know what time of the year that was?
What time of the year?
Yeah.
I'm not sure when he got his legal mail. I don't recall.
And so is it fair to say that somebody informed you that he started making some incriminating statements?
I'm not sure anyone informed me. I mean, I heard what he told me.
Finish that.
I said I only heard what he told me.
And so you, based on those things and not knowing that he was getting his legal mail, you decided to pull the companions and replace them with guards?
I replaced them with guards based on his bizarre behavior.
Why? What's the difference?
What's the difference of?
Why do you need guards rather than companions?
Because his behavior was bizarre, for more protection. He was covering himself with feces. He was, washing his face in toilets.
Do you believe that guards are more credible than the companions when it comes to relaying information?
I didn't want the companions to have access to his legal mail. I didn't want them to see the legal mail.
You didn't trust the companions?
It's not that I don't trust them. I wanted the heightened security since he had his legal mail.
All right. And you were concerned that they might see that and communicate that with someone else?
Yes, I didn't want anyone to have access to it.
Do you believe you're going to get a more accurate reporting of Rick Allen's conditions if you place the guards on that cell?
I believe I'd get a more accurate, correct.
Do you believe, or did the guards fill out the same kind of door sheets or forms or bed boards, whatever you...
They did.
Sorry, I'm getting sloppy again. Log sheets.
Log sheets, bed boards, suicide companion logs.
And those would have been 5-minute observation logs?
Depending on what he was on, if he was not on mental health, then they would be 15.
And those forms were preserved as well, is that right?
Correct.
And are those also some of the forms that you turned over to central administration?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about phone calls at the prison, okay?
Sure.
So my understanding is that the inmates are subject to this phone system, which is basically run by GTL, I think is the name of the company.
Correct.
Is that generally accurate?
Yes.
So the service is subcontracted out to somebody else?
Correct.
But the Indiana Department of Corrections has an arrangement, some kind of contractual arrangement with GTL to do that, right?
Yes.
Did you or your staff monitor any of the phone calls that would have been made through GTL lines?
I did not monitor any phone calls made. I'm not sure if Ms. Maps had access to it, but that would be a better question for her.
And this is where things get a little bit more complicated. But there's actually more than one phone there's clearly more than one phone. Let me withdraw that question. There are different services, phone services, that are used at the prison, right? You have the GTL system, but you have your own kind of internal system. Is that accurate?
Both phones are GTL. Yeah, there's phones in the rec yard and the tablets are GTL.
So the phone in the rec yard are not GTL based?
I believe they are GTL based. Yes.
I'm trying to make sure I understand.
Yeah.
And then there's a phone that they move around to the cell door once or twice a week, right? That's kind of a portable phone.
Yes.
And is that not GTL?
That's a dock phone, I believe. Yes.
So there are two different kinds.
Okay. Yes.
There's a GTL setup and there's a DOC setup.
Right.
Does the prison have the ability to monitor the DOC phone?
I believe so. Again, they would probably be a better question for maps, but I would assume so. Yes.
And then there's the tablet, right?
Correct.
And is that a GTL based product?
It is.
And so there are communications that can be made by an inmate to other or by, frankly, inaudible on that system, right?
I mean, they got to be approved. So whoever's on his phone list would be approved.
Okay.
So you just,
For phone calls?
right. I mean,
But there's also e-communications, right?
what's e-communications?
Like text or emails. And
I don't believe there's text. No.
those are GTL based. In other words, GTL has access to that information.
Correct.
Can the prison get access to that information when you need it?
I believe internal affairs can, yes.
Mr. Rossi, 1 second, Your Honor. Let me redirect you back to the conversation about his cell block, okay? He had a mattress in that block. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
And is it accurate to say that the mattress was essentially on the floor?
It was on the bed frame.
But let's get to the heart of this. The bed frame is a metal slab, is it not?
Yes, sir.
And the metal slab is really close to the floor, just within inches of it.
Yes, sir.
The cells next door also have the inmates that are next to him in the same block also have mattresses, correct?
All 255 of them, sir.
And they also have beds, right?
Correct.
Bed frames
Correct.
that are more traditional bed frames, aren't they?
They're just about a foot higher.
They're elevated.
Say that again, sir.
They're elevated.
Correct.
And do you acknowledge that in his cell, he had no tables to sit at?
There's no tables in any cells.
Not in his, right?
Not in any, sir.
But I'm talking about his.
Okay, there's no tables.
All right. And he had no chair to sit on, did he?
There's no chairs.
He was given a cardboard box. That's what he was eating on, right?
He was. I don't know if he was eating on it, but typically the cardboard boxes people put TVs or personal items.
That was his amenity, a cardboard box, right?
Sure.
Otherwise concrete, right?
Yes, sir.
Steel?
Rebar.
The whole 9 yards.
Prison, sir.
Yeah. Toilet?
Absolutely.
Steel?
I'm assuming.
Mounted on the floor or the wall?
It's mounted, yes.
A couple of feet from his bed, right?
Standard.
Basically, he goes to the bathroom pretty much where he lays his head and goes to sleep.
I don't know where he lays his head, but yes.
A couple feet?
Sure.
Mr. Rossi, I don't have anything further. The court. Ms. Diener. Questions by Ms. Diener. Warden Galippo, do you have corrections experience prior to your position in supervision?
In the Department of Corrections?
Or anywhere?
Prior to the Department of Corrections, I was a corporal in the Marine Corps.
And then were you a correction officer before you moved up the ranks?
I was.
And so when you gave us a number on your total experience at DOC, the 28 years, does that include your time as a correction officer?
Yes, ma'am.
As the warden for Westville, did you have any choice in whether Mr. Allen was assigned to your facility?
I did not.
Did his placement come with instructions?
Yes.
From where?
Central office.
And what instructions were you given?
Put him in a cell that has camera access. So a suicide cell, A1-107.
Did they actually assign him to A1-107?
There's only 4 cells that have camera access, and A1-107 was one of them.
Okay.
Yep.
But I guess I wondered, when he gets there then, do you have the choice of any?
No, ma'am.
One of your 4?
No, ma'am.
They tell you exactly what cell he goes in?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know anything about Richard Allen before he gets there?
Never heard of him.
With regard to the camera cell, A1-107, how many other camera cells in your facility?
In WCU, there's 4. There's 1 per pod. A pod, or A pod, B pod, C pod, and D pod.
And you said there are 255 people in solitary confinement. Is that describing A, B, C, and D?
Correct, ma'am.
And of those 255, 4 of them potentially would be in a cell just like his. Well, he plus 3 others.
Correct.
You were asked if there was a camera installed. Is this camera part of the structure of the cell?
It is.
So you didn't put one in there just because it was him.
Correct.
And it has no audio.
Correct.
So how is the camera used and for what purpose?
The camera, those cells are normally designed for inmates that are on suicide watch, so we can monitor behavior through physical presence and a secondary observation.
Through physical presence by someone?
By a guard.
Guard.
And secondary observation. So if someone's on suicide watch, typically that video would be put in the control pose so we can have a constant without having a constant order.
So a person in a designated location can see what's going on in his cell 24/7?
Only one person, the person who works in the control room.
So there's one person in the control room.
Correct.
And this is for his safety, correct?
Yes.
Did you receive other instructions regarding the safety of Richard Allen with regard to his placement?
No.
When you talk about constant watch, was that part of the requirement?
Constant part of our requirement for?
When he's placed in a camera cell.
Yes.
Does that, in addition to itself, require you to video him when he is out of his cell?
The video out of his cell was a separate order that was specifically designed for Mr. Allen.
And that order came at the same time or sometime after, if you remember?
I believe a few months after.
And again, did you have any decision making in that process?
No, ma'am.
Did that come from central office also?
It did.
So by being required to have visual on him at all times, what steps did you have to take to put that into place?
Just follow instructions. Anytime he came out of his cell, it's being recorded.
And you had to have, and had you had to do that with other inmates before?
Yes.
And so what does it involve with regard to personnel?
It takes at least 2 staff to move any offender outside the cell, and there's 1 more staff for the camera. So it'd take an additional resource of 1 staff person.
So 2 to actually do the movement?
Correct.
And 1 to record the event?
Yes, ma'am.
There was a question about his lights. Was his cell unique to the others in his pod or in the facility with regard to how the lighting works?
His lighting was never interfered with. There's a light, and he has a button in his cell where he can basically a night light, and so he can dim it.
So if he doesn't dim the light, it's going to be on?
Yes, he's the only one that has access to dim it.
His window, was it the same as everyone else's window?
Correct.
And when you say you had to replace it, or you were asked if you had to replace it, did you have to replace his window?
It wasn't scratched up that bad, but the request came in to be replaced, and I'm assuming we replaced it, probably within 2 weeks.
And where did the request come from?
I believe it came from Mr. Allen and Dr. Walla. I believe it came from Dr. Walla.
But you were under no requirement to change that window. It wasn't in violation of policy, was it?
No.
Were you doing it to assist him with adjustment to his circumstances?
Correct. I was doing it to assist Dr. Walla in her orders.
She came to you with other requests, did she not?
I believe so.
What are the ones you remember?
Specifically his tablet. When he broke his first tablet, Dr. Walla asked if he could get another tablet. I recall that. That was arranged.
And did you do so?
Excuse me, ma'am?
Did you do that for him?
We did.
And explain to us the process of a tablet. So when a person comes into the facility, are the rules different for a safekeeper or another inmate with regard to access to a tablet?
All inmates are issued tablets. Again, this is the first safekeeper I had. So Mr. Allen was issued a tablet. The only thing different is when the general population or anybody else breaks their tablet, they won't get another tablet until they're reimbursed GTL the $250. He wasn't able to reimburse for the $250, so we assigned him another tablet so he could have communication with his attorneys. He didn't want to interfere with any of the we didn't want it to interfere with any of the legal process.
Okay.
So that was the decision that was made.
So you're making an extra effort to assist him.
Yes.
When he'd gotten his first tablet, did he get it faster or with more expedited processing than maybe an inmate that came in next to him on the same day?
Yes. There's probably a few hundred inmates still don't have tablets at Westville.
And they've been there a long time?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's talk about the family visit. The family visit was an unusual circumstance, was it not?
Very unusual, or very usual.
Another accommodation you made to assist.
Correct.
Mr. Allen, were there any conditions attached to that accommodation?
To accommodate him, we had to cancel several other inmates' visitations because he has to have the visitation room all to himself. Typical visitation is 1 hour. I think we allotted 2 hours for him. So yeah, accommodations were made. There's no one. The other 254 inmates that are kept in that unit never have face-to-face visits. He was the only.
They all have to use their tablet and talk to their family on their tablet, correct?
They don't even use their tablet. So if someone came to visit an inmate there, they would use the kiosk at the front gate, and the inmate would go in a different holding area, and he would use the kiosk. So no family members are permitted inside segregation. No contact visits are authorized inside segregation, except for Mr. Allen. He was the first one I had in my 5 years.
And is it the segregation area also sometimes referred to as a restrictive housing unit?
Sure.
Are those interchangeable or should I not interchange them?
The acronym for it?
Well, is it a restricted housing unit?
Yes.
Okay.
Where the visitation was?
No. Where he's housed.
Yes. Restrictive housing, yes.
And so he gets a family visit you arranged for him. Did you tell him you have to confess to me in order to get a family visit?
I never asked him any questions.
Was Dr. Walla his advocate for requesting you to accommodate such?
As far as the visits, I think that came from central office because the request was made, I believe, maybe from Mr. Razi, if the family could come in and visit. And we honored that and made arrangements for that.
So you actually were asked to do it by central office, but it was up to you to figure out how to logistically make it happen.
The logistics, yes.
So in this family visit that doesn't happen for people in your unit,
Correct.
did you have to make a decision as to whether he would be unshackled in order to hug his wife?
No. So routine, the only time he was shackled or restrained was during transportation. Once he got to the destination, like Mr. Razi explained, he changed into a jumpsuit. The restraints were removed, which was also very unusual for someone assigned to RHU. Restraints are never removed outside a cell.
So another accommodation made for him.
Yes.
And the reason he couldn't have water or go to the bathroom, you indicated, was because he couldn't leave his chair?
Correct.
And was that for safety reasons?
It's safety reasons for trafficking. When people use the bathroom, they might have something in the bathroom and the inmates will follow. So if they go to the bathroom, visitations are canceled.
So a family member, for people who don't understand this, could go to the restroom, leave something behind, and then if Mr. Allen goes to the restroom, that would be trafficking.
If he picks it up.
If they left something behind for him.
Correct.
And so that was the circumstance of his family visit.
Yes.
Now, again, that was recorded. Was it recorded visually because of the constant watch order?
So when he went to the visitation room, all visitation rooms have camera access. So whether it be 4 or 5 cameras. So at that time, we didn't have the need to put the handheld recorder because there's already cameras in that location.
So when the question was posed that there were guards in the room, you indicated there are always guards in the room.
Always.
Are they there to listen to his conversation?
No.
Why are they there?
To provide security.
Did you review any documents in preparation for today or for your deposition about events of when a taser was used on Mr. Allen?
No.
And so if the records would reflect that the taser was used on one occasion and another occasion, it was just physical placement of hands by a guard on him to subdue him.
Right. The taser was used.
Would you know whether that's incorrect?
The taser was used because, like I said, he refused to shut the cuff port.
And that's a safety risk?
Yes.
And the dates of the taser use, to my knowledge, occurred during May or around that time period. Mr. Allen been in the facility for quite some time at that point, correct?
I believe so, yes.
So at that point, would it have been clear to him that you don't leave your hands in the cuff port or refuse to put them in the cuff port? Mr. Razi, objection, speculation. The court, sustained. Is it a regular procedure that an offender would be required to follow orders of transport officers with regard to placing their hands in the cuff port, for putting the cuffs on or off, or to remove them once that's complete?
Correct.
And so they would have rules to follow with regard to how they respond to that.
Correct. And the inmate population is well aware of those rules.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Mr. Allen would have been well aware of those rules, that the cuff port is to be secured.
Thank you. So walking away, as suggested, to just let Mr. Allen calm down and decide to follow the rules would not be acceptable. The guards would be in trouble?
Correct.
How much participation in the placement of companions do you have? You said you don't decide if a companion is assigned, but in this situation, you said that you did change them.
I did.
And so do you closely monitor what inmate companions are doing or not doing?
I typically don't look at the log sheets. The only time I intervene with the suicide companions is how many he would be allotted to have. I think when he first got there, they switched, I believe, every 4 hours. The suicide companions. So I don't know. I'm just going to throw out a number. Westville may have 50, 60, or 70 suicide companions. I wanted to limit the number that were assigned to him just to control communication. So I believe I probably allowed 8 different suicide companions to monitor his activities.
And when you say monitor his communication, is that because you are trying to elicit certain information from him?
I am trying to not expose information. The less people that deal with Mr. Allen, the better. Unfortunately, inmates do talk to each other.
So your efforts were intended to keep it quiet that Mr. Allen is there?
Correct.
And what happens when a lot of people know that a high-profile detainee is in the prison?
They communicate.
And you're trying to keep that to a minimum?
Correct.
When you say he received his legal mail and it resulted in you making a change, what was your purpose in changing it to guards?
Because I didn't want companions to have access to his legal mail. He still had the ability to shove legal mail through the door if he wanted to. So I wanted to eliminate that possibility at all from his legal mail ever having a chance to circulate through outside the prison.
So did you have a conversation with the guard companions about what the expectations would be as a door companion? Or had they done that job before and they knew?
They have not. We just told them to document the behavior. We put out an order if anyone was to go inside Mr. Allen's cell for any routine searches or shakedowns, it would be myself, the major, or the lead captain. In the case of an emergency, of course, responding staff could go in the cell, but when his legal mail was in there, those are the 3 people that had access to go inside.
So can you repeat who those would be?
Myself, Major Cornett, and lead captain Gary Lewis.
Cornett, Cornett.
Correct.
And the other one was?
Gary Lewis.
Lewis.
He was RHU supervisor captain.
Lewis?
Correct.
Are these supervisors?
The highest of supervisors. Major Cornett is the highest ranking custody supervisor, and Captain Gary Lewis is the highest ranking custody supervisor in that unit.
And you did that for Mr. Allen's protection of his legal?
Correct.
Case information? Was there a rule? We were talking about what were the suicide officer companions told with regards to their responsibilities. So you said document behavior?
Correct.
Document anyone entering the cell?
Yes.
Is writing down what he says a directive?
It's not a directive. Some choose to be very detailed and some not.
What about his behavior would fall? What would create increased responsibilities for a door companion?
How his behavior would increase responsibilities?
Yes.
If his behavior became bizarre, which it did, then we switched him to officers.
But when you've got officer companions and they're documenting behavior, did they have any responsibilities with regard to additional responsibilities or action based on Mr. Allen's behavior?
No.
If Mr. Allen was self-harming, were they just supposed to write it down, or what would they do?
They would alert staff.
I would look at that as an additional responsibility.
Correct.
That's kind of what I was looking for. Are there any other additional responsibilities they would have?
To alert staff, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
At one point, did you have to have another conversation with officer staff because there was an incident of self-harm and you wanted to reiterate to them the concern?
Yes, my concern was they need to stop it.
Did you have to do that more than once?
Only once.
Now, other people had suicide companions in your facility, correct?
Correct. It's frequent.
And do all suicide companions serve the same function?
They do.
And do all of the suicide companion logs get put in the same place as Mr. Allen's?
Yes.
And are they?
Strike that. No. Mr. Allen's were placed, and Mrs. Inaudible would pick them up.
And how was that different from what would happen with the others?
Well, when he first got there, it wasn't a secured box, and we found it necessary to put them in a secured box. And we had a few that went missing, none of his, but we needed to put them in a secured box where the unit team manager or Dr. Walla would only have access to that box.
So a suicide companion gets them with their shift. They have their log.
Correct.
They go put it in the lockbox for Mr. Allen.
Yes.
And if they weren't watching Mr. Allen, they would just put it in a location.
Same box.
Same box?
Same box.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there was a locked portion for Mr. Allen's?
There was a locked portion for all of them. That was a transition we did. Before there wasn't. It was just you put it in like an inbox. And then we decided it's probably best that we secure it. So we put it in a lock box.
So that locking down of suicide logs, once they're put in the box, was done for all offenders having suicide companions?
Correct.
And then a supervisor sorted them out?
Correct.
And sent them on their way?
Yes, ma'am.
Was any suicide companion, inmate, or officer directed by you or anyone you're aware of to ask Mr. Allen about his charges or his offense?
None.
Did you ever ask him about his charges or his offense?
Never.
If an inmate companion told a family member that Mr. Allen was confessing, you indicate you have no knowledge of that.
I would not have knowledge of it, no.
Are you involved with administration to the effect that you know why companions fill out log sheets?
I'm not sure where that originated, no, but that's a mental health order that they fill out the log sheets.
Was there anything different about Mr. Allen getting his legal mail that was unique?
The only thing that was unique about it is all legal mail throughout the facility is copied, so they don't get the originals. Mr. Allen did get his originals, so they were not copied.
What would be the reason for copying legal mail before it goes to an offender?
The introduction of drugs. A lot of legal mail is not really legal mail. It's just from a fake law address, and they can spray K2 or synthetic marijuana on it, and the offenders get the legal mail and they smoke it.
Okay, thank you. You were asked about the condition of his cell that has no table, no chairs, mattress on the floor. You indicated no inmate has a table or chair. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what would be the reason, if any, that the bed in an isolation camera cell would be basically on the floor?
So the inmate that were on suicide watch can't get away from observation and go under the bed.
So again, it's for his safety.
For his safety.
Did Mr. Allen make a specific request to speak with you with regard to a confession?
I believe 1 or 2 times, yes.
How was his request?
In a form.
Delivered to you?
In a request for interview, I believe it was.
Is that written?
Yes.
What do you do when someone in Mr. Allen's position makes a written request like that?
On his case, I turn them over to internal affairs.
So if he sends you a written request to confess, you don't go talk to him?
No.
Ms. Diener, Judge, may I approach the witness? The court, you may. Warden Galippo, I'd like to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 8. Will you take a look? It's got 2 pages. Make sure you have a chance to see both. Mr. Rossi, 8, Stacy, 8, Ms. Diener, 8.
Yes.
Can you identify those?
Yes, I can.
And the first page is?
Chain of evidence, an evidence record to say what I did with the letters on the first request for interview. I dated it 3/5/2023 at 16:47. So 4:47. Signed it and gave it over to Internal Affairs with his request.
I'd like to ask you about that.
Sure.
Now, the top page is when you turned it over to Internal Affairs is the chain of custody.
Yes.
That one's dated April the 5th, and the other document that's actually in a written request by Mr. Allen has a date in March. Do you believe that he did that twice and maybe?
I believe I did get more than one request. I definitely remember this one.
Okay.
And this one was dated March because I put the date on it myself on the evidence card. I wouldn't put the dates.
So you had at least one request from him and you recognize that.
Yes.
And the chain of custody form, it may be for a secondary request or it may be misdated.
Correct. Or unless there was two pieces. It looks like they were both collected on Internal Affairs in April, and this one was in March. So I'm not sure how soon they got it, but
how did you get it to him?
Anything I would get, unusual requests for interviews, requests for a Bible, whatever, Internal Affairs would pick it up. I don't know if they pick it up weekly, but I'd make sure it left my office and down to Internal Affairs so it would be secured.
How does it get from your office to Internal Affairs? Do you have a runner?
Internal Affairs comes to transport it. They'll come themselves to get it.
Okay.
In this case, who transported those would have been Ms. Maps. Looks like Jessica signed that, which is also an investigator for Internal Affairs, and she's also a CPO, so a certified police officer for the Department of Corrections. The Department of Correction transported his mail.
So you have a designated place where you put things for Internal Affairs, and they come and get them when they choose?
They come get it, put it in their evidence box, which is located in their office under camera.
Ms. Diener, okay, state would move to admit Exhibit 8. The court, any objection? Mr. Rossi, I'm sorry, I have no objection. The court, all right, without objection, 8 is admitted. So you did not interview him pursuant to his request?
No.
How much contact would you have face-to-face with Mr. Allen?
When he first got there, I'd say that I would look at him visually, probably daily for the first maybe 2, 3, 4 months, then kind of maybe a few times a week. Then when the bizarre behavior continued, probably daily. And then that tapered off maybe a few times a week. I go on those pods daily, whether it is A107 or C107. And I was in that unit daily.
And that's how you choose to do your job, to keep track of what was going on?
I have to be on that unit. So does the major.
And so during some of those face-to-face contacts with Mr. Allen, how would you approach him with regard to conversation?
I wouldn't approach him. I would look into his cell, and if he approached me or conversated with me, then I would answer his question.
And during those times, did he make statements to you about the crimes he's being charged with?
Yes.
And did he provide you any details?
No, he just confessed.
And you indicated that may have been written down by someone else in the vicinity. Is that correct?
There is an annotation in the suicide log where he also confessed, and that was in more detail than what he verbally told me.
You're saying the suicide log, being the companion sheet,
Correct.
had more details than what he spoke to you?
Correct.
Were you also present for some of his statements containing details related to this homicide? These homicides when he was in the presence of others besides door companions?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
If I directed your attention to maybe meeting with medical?
It's possible. So I was both in, I'm not sure what he said during medical, but I was in both when he got his medications, and they were both recorded. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah.
You weren't the only one that heard these things?
No.
And to the extent that there were multiple people present, It was also recorded on the handheld camera,
Correct.
and you're familiar with those statements?
I'm not familiar with the exact statements. I remember them because they were in the nurses' station and in segregation. So it would have been Dr. Martin and the medical team doing assessments.
And when I say familiar, I'm not saying do you remember them verbatim. I guess what I'm saying is, do you remember the circumstances of the situation that he was making them?
Yes.
And was anyone interrogating him?
No.
Was anyone asking him questions about his crime?
No.
Are you aware of any time that anyone did?
I'm unaware. No.
In fact, were there times that you spoke with Mr. Allen and that he indicated that he was properly cared for at your facility?
He was.
And were there times where he was asked if he needed anything and he indicated he was fine with what he had?
I've asked him personally if he needed anything.
In fact, you offered to get him a loaner television. What was the circumstances of that?
We have a loaner televisions, based on same way with the tablet. It's kind of like a mental health progression order. If your behavior continues to behave, then he gets it. Certain privileges.
So it was a situation where you were offering an earned privilege if his behavior improved.
If I recall, I remember him saying he didn't want one.
Was it directed at him disclosing information about his crime?
No. Nope.
Did Mr. Allen ever tell you that someone was interrogating him or coercing him to make statements?
No, he did not.
Would he have had ample opportunity to do that?
He would have, yeah.
Ms. Diener, I have no other questions. The court, Mr. Rozzi. Mr. Rozzi. Judge, can I have permission to ask a few omitted questions? The court, certainly. Mr. Rozzi, thank you. Redirect examination of Warden John Galipeau. Questions by Mr. Rozzi. Warden Galippo, you have a case management system at the prison. I think maybe it's called Insight. If I'm not mistaken, are you familiar with that?
It's called Insight.
I might be getting it confused with another. Do you have a case management system at the prison?
We have case managers, yes.
And to be more clear, do you have the ability to access records at the prison through the computer or through the computer database about people's criminal histories and their circumstances in the criminal justice system?
I mean, I don't.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, does that even sound familiar?
Insight does not sound familiar, no.
Do you have access to any system where you can get on and say, okay, this is what Rick Allen was convicted of, or this is what Sam Smith down in cell block A107 was convicted of, anything like that?
Yeah, I have access to see why people are incarcerated, yes.
And what's that? What system are you accessing?
I'm not accessing anything. I would just ask or check their personal packet.
So a personal packet is one place you go.
Sure.
I'm assuming that's an electronic one?
Both.
Do you have the ability as a warden to access information about other people in the DOC that are not in your facility?
Do I have access to find out where they're at and what their crimes are?
Yes.
Sure.
And what system do you use to access that?
It's on the internet. It's on the Indiana Department of Correction homepage. You go to Inmate Locator, type in their DOC number, and it provides the information.
So you use the same system I do to find out where somebody is, don't you?
Sure.
And what if you wanted more personal information about their intake at a facility, for example, like at RDC? Do you have the ability to access that?
I have the ability to their packets.
Can you say that again?
I have the ability to look at their packets.
Where are those packets located?
In the records room. I never had a reason to, but they're kept in the records room.
So if somebody were housed in while you were at Westville, if somebody were housed at Wabash Valley, for example, you'd have the ability to look at a packet of information. It'll give you detailed information about that inmate?
No, that packet would be at Wabash Valley.
So I'm going to trying to ask as clear questions as I can. Is there any information that's available to you at the DOC regarding the details of other inmates outside of Westville and their incarceration in DOC?
No.
Is there a policy that prohibits the use of inmate information for personal reasons? In other words, like you can't get on there and start looking up a case because you have some personal interest in the matter.
I'm not sure. I mean, you can on Google. I mean,
No, I'm talking about just DOC for a minute.
no.
Things that the public can't get their hands on.
No.
Do you have a policy that you're familiar with that says you can't do this for personal reasons?
Not that I'm familiar with. No.
Now, I'm reacting to Ms. Diener's questions to you. She asked you some questions about Rick's initial assignment to Westville. Do you recall those last questions?
Yes.
And you said that you didn't have any choice about his assignment, right?
That is correct.
If you don't want someone at Westville, do you have the ability as the boss to just call and say, we really don't want him here anymore?
Not how it works there.
So the answer is no.
The answer is no.
Ms. Diener was asking you about the number of other people in that WCU unit. I think you told her about 255 is what you said. Do you remember that?
Correct.
How many of those other people in that, of those 255, are pretrial detainees?
1.
And who is that?
Mr. Allen.
And how many of those other people in that 255 have never been convicted of a crime before?
None.
Ms. Diener asked you about the cameras in the cell. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And I think what you said is that those cameras were permanently mounted in the cell, right?
Correct.
So he was put in that cell specifically because the cell had the capacity to take video of him while he was there.
Correct.
And you said there's only one person that can see that video, right?
Correct.
And that person would be what I'm going to loosely refer to as the control officer. Maybe that was on duty.
That's correct.
Now, if there were other officers standing there talking to the control officers, they could certainly see it, right?
I mean, they're not allowed in the control room.
What about the next control officer that comes in?
They would have access.
So that's 2 people, right?
Correct.
And then so on and so forth.
Correct.
You can have lots of people that work in the control room.
Not lots, but selective. There's a lot of training in the control room.
You have turnover too at the DOC, right?
Of course.
The WCU is considered a disciplinary unit, isn't it?
We have other forms of inmates in there that are not disciplinary.
I'll get to that, but it's considered disciplinary, isn't it?
Sure.
And administrative?
Sure.
And so many of the inmates that are housed in the WCU are there because they're punished for wrongdoing in other parts of the prison.
They're being sanctioned. Correct.
And those inmates have 8.5 by 12.5 foot cells, right?
All the same.
Concrete and steel.
All that.
A toilet that's mounted to the wall,
Correct.
just like Rick Allen's, right?
Yes, sir.
So he was treated just the same as those inmates who were on disciplinary segregation for these other conduct violations.
Correct.
You told Ms. Diener that you made accommodations for him, right?
I did.
Made an accommodation by getting him the tablet, right?
Correct.
And you made an accommodation by replacing the window in his cell.
Correct.
Did you replacing his tablet place some significant burden on you or your staff?
It's not the way we trained, or it's not the way we treated the rest of the facility. And you had...
No, but I'm asking you if it was really burdensome for you.
It was inconsistent.
Inconsistent with what?
Inconsistent with the way we distribute tablets. We have tablets that are about 300 short. That tablet could have gone to a person that did not break his tablet.
What I'm asking, was it hard for you to get him another tablet? I mean, you're the boss, right?
It can be difficult. GTL is a private company. I'm the boss of Westville, not the president of GTL.
In this case, was it hard for you to get him another tablet?
It took a few days.
Was the tablet in the prison?
I believe so.
All right. So physically, you had to walk to another unit and grab the tablet, right?
Something like that.
You have a lot of time to walk around at that prison, don't you?
A new station alert has arrived.
I walk around the prison, yes.
I mean, that's what you do when you're there, isn't it?
Well, I do more than that, but yes, I do make rounds.
And you said that you made accommodations for him to visit his family, right?
Correct.
Do you have regular visitation at that prison?
Not for that unit.
I'm sorry?
Not for that unit.
Well, do you have regular visitation at the prison?
For general population.
You actually have a building that's reserved for that.
For general population.
But it exists, right? You have people, inmates, and their families coming to see them?
For general population, correct.
And so how many times a week do you have visitation?
Every day.
All right. And how long does that last?
1 hour.
So 1 out of 24 hours a day, that room is consumed by people in general population and their families, right?
Correct.
So it's not that much of a burden to use another 2 hours on one of those 2 days, one time in 8, for the small months he was there to accommodate him.
I mean, you probably canceled up to 14 visits to accommodate him.
Well, you could have just done it the hour after you had the regular visitation.
Or we couldn't have done it at all.
Okay, well, yeah.
Correct.
You couldn't have accommodated him at all, right?
Correct.
So you made a small accommodation, which wasn't really a burden on you, was it?
It was operations. Yeah, it took a little bit.
Same people still working, right?
Abnormal situation.
Ms. Diener asked you about these guards, and your response is that they don't have to listen to their conversations, or the guards don't have to listen to Rick Allen's conversations, right? They're not directed to.
No.
But they are given a pen, right?
The guards?
Yeah.
No.
To write with?
Who? The guards?
Yeah.
No.
Well,
the visitation room supervisor has a pen.
Okay.
It's just a log.
Well, they had log sheets, the log sheets, right?
Correct.
On those sheets, they're writing down the things that he's saying in the cell, aren't they?
I'm not aware of that during visitation.
Have you ever looked at one of these log sheets that have been...
I haven't looked at the visitation log sheet. I don't know what was written on visitation. I can't tell you if he was on suicide watch at that time or not.
Let me redirect.
Because he was on it, so...
Sorry, you finish.
No, go ahead.
Let me redirect you to the guards that were standing at his door cell monitoring him, okay?
Sure.
They had pens and paper.
Correct.
And that was given to them by the DOC?
Correct.
And they were writing down the things that he was saying?
Correct.
So they were naturally listening to him while they were writing those things down, right?
They were a lot closer when they were in their cell.
Right. What I'm saying is they had to be listening to what he was saying, or they couldn't write it down.
During when he was in his cell, yes. I thought we were talking about visitation.
No.
Oh.
You said you chose 8 inmate companions specifically, approximately, I think you said, to monitor Mr. Allen, right?
Correct.
Did you look at the background of any of those inmates and their personal packets to see what their history was before you did that?
No, sir.
You have no idea if they were the most dishonest people on the planet, do you?
I just know they came from the plus unit.
And you also know they are convicted felons.
Correct.
And you said that you know that inmates talk to each other, right?
Correct.
That's common knowledge, right?
Right.
Lots of snitching going on in the prison.
A lot of communication.
You knew that before you assigned any inmates to him, didn't you?
Correct.
But you did it anyway.
I didn't make the assignment.
But you just said you put 8 people on him.
I limited how many people. I didn't make the assignment to put a suicide companion on him.
Okay.
That came from mental health.
Well, you could have talked to medical staff and said, hey, maybe we shouldn't use an inmate, correct?
I don't control medical staff. They're a separate entity.
You're the boss, aren't you?
I am the boss. They're contractual, and I'm also not a doctor.
Does it take a medical degree to assign somebody to a door cell to observe an inmate?
It takes a mental health professional to put someone on suicide orders.
But does it take somebody with a medical degree to assign someone to a door cell?
I'm not sure.
Cell door.
I wouldn't think so, no.
Do those companions have any mental health training?
I believe they go through training, yeah.
And what's the extent of it?
I'm not sure. That'd be a better question for Dr. Walla.
So these log sheets were placed in a box, right?
Correct.
And that box was secured?
Correct.
And those sheets eventually made it to Internal Affairs or Dr. Walla, depending on the circumstances, right?
I don't recall any door sheets going to Internal Affairs, but they have gone to Dr. Walla.
The video did. I'm sorry.
The video could, but
It was preserved by Internal Affairs,
well, it's preserved by the server.
which is at the direction or that Internal Affairs is in control of, right?
They're not control of the server, but yeah, they would download it.
Okay.
I'm not sure how long.
They handled the manual side of that.
Sure.
And all of those items then are secured for central administration if necessary, right?
If needed, yeah.
So there's a system in place at the prison to secure all this information
Correct.
and to process it.
Sure.
You were answering some questions about you, basically your daily visits with Rick when he first got here. You recall those answers?
Yes.
Or those general questions you were being asked?
Yes.
Rick was isolated really from any contact with other inmates, to be sure, right?
They all are.
And he's really isolated from any contact with certainly anybody from the public, right?
They all are, sir.
And yes, but I'm talking about Rick.
Sure.
And he was very little contact with any guards, right?
He had more contact than the rest of them.
Then who?
He had more contact than the other 254.
Yeah, because you took him to get a haircut. You had to assign 5 guards to him to get his haircut, right?
Or when I assigned a guard to his cell 24/7.
Right.
Right.
But his contact with the outside world was extremely limited in the WCU.
Other than his tablet and phone calls and visitation,
There was almost no social interaction available to him anywhere on that unit, is there?
what do you mean there's no? I mean, there's phone calls, there's visits available.
They don't have the ability to associate with anybody, whether it be a group of other offenders, sit and play cards, anything.
Not typically, no.
That's kind of the whole point of the unit, isn't it?
Correct.
So for somebody to be in that unit and to be chomping at the bit to talk to somebody at their door would not be unusual, would it?
For the most part, there's not a lot of people standing by for conversations.
Mr. Rossi, I don't have any further questions. The court, Ms. Diener, just a couple, Judge. Recross examination of Warden John Galipeau. Questions by Ms. Diener. When you were asked about limiting his inmate companions to 8, did you handpick the companions that were assigned?
I did not.
So you didn't select them by name or by criminal history?
Just by number.
And so if one of them didn't work out, someone else made a decision and replaced them with someone else?
Correct.
With access to socialization for someone in that unit, as Mr. Allen was, did all of them have mental health stop by twice a day to see if they needed anything?
No.
So there is a record that shows that a person stops by his cell twice a day and fills out a restricted housing unit form, and they can check a box as to whether he's fine or whether he wants services. Are you familiar with the form?
Yes.
And so you're telling me that's not happening with everyone in the unit?
No, he definitely got pulled more for mental health and medical.
Mental health and
Medical.
And when you said pulled, as in ask if he needed anything?
Or removed from his cell.
Or removed from his cell? Okay.
Yes.
And that was the other thing I was going to get to. He had the opportunity almost every day to go to the medical room for his vitals. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's not typical?
No.
Even for other people in a 107 cell in the other pods?
No, unless they were on some sort of hunger strike when they needed to get vitals or a BMI it's not normal.
And then he could be moved from his cell for showers and for rec, correct?
Correct.
And what about his access to the chaplain?
Upon request, if he wanted to have access to a chaplain, he would send her over there, or we would send her over there.
And how often would the chaplain be on the unit, the A unit?
The chaplain, I believe, go weekly. He gave me one specific request, which I remember, which he wanted to see a chaplain, and I sent a chaplain over, I believe, that day.
And then you said you walk the unit regularly?
Correct.
You were asked if the unit was a disciplinary unit, and you said it was also administrative. So you had people there that are being sanctioned, which you agreed with.
Correct.
What are the administrative placements?
It'd be administrative placement if you're pending an investigation. I'm sorry, you could be placed, and several of them are placed in there for protective custody reasons. Several of them are placed there in isolation. If they're on a hunger strike, we'll put them in an isolation cell so we can access their water intake or food intake. So they're nowhere near another offender. So, again, A and B pod, so the judge understands A and B pod are long-term segregated statewide offenders. C and D pod are Westville offenders. So they're not the worst of the worst in those pods. They're level 2 offenders that have committed a violation and are segregated to that unit. A and B pods filled with a variety of crimes, some statewide PCs, some sanctioned to a year, some sanctioned for 2 years. It all depends. Some have 1 year left in their term. Some might have 60. It all depends on what they did to get there.
So we're not talking about people who are there for a week.
No.
And when you're describing this, we're talking about A, B, C, and D?
Correct.
He's in A1 107.
Correct.
So A and B are people from other facilities.
Correct.
That were not placed in Westville for reception diagnostic.
Correct. They're typically level 3 or 4 offenders that would not be placed at Westville.
In which pods?
A and B.
So he's in there with people who would not typically be in a Westville inmate.
Correct.
But they're either for disciplinary reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Or for administrative reasons.
Correct.
And administrative reasons would be pending internal investigation for misconduct?
Or anything. Could be pending trafficking.
Okay.
Anything that internal affairs is looking into. But most of them are sanctioned to a fixed time to do in segregation.
And then you said protective custody. Does Mr. Allen fall into that category?
No.
What is protective custody?
Protective custody is an inmate that's in any facility that can't function out in population, whether he, testified in court against another inmate or just in fear of his safety or life, We'll run him just like in our HU unit. We have our own protective custody unit inside Westville as well. We've got, at the time, it was 28 beds. I think they expanded it a little bit more, but they don't have access to the general population either. And they go to rec separately. They eat separately. Everything's done with that unit. So you were used to doing that. What you had to do for Mr. Allen, because you have people that are in a similar circumstance of protective custody where their own safety is at risk for being around other offenders.
Yes.
Okay.
That was me supposed to be reading that.
Oh.
And then you said isolation because of hunger strike.
Uh-huh.
Is that because you can keep a better eye on them in that
Yes.
area?
Typically, when we want to put them in a cell that doesn't have any water, so we realize how many ounces of fluid they're drinking. They're not around another offender, so they can't give them food that we don't know about, just so we can monitor them better.
Ms. Diener. Okay, no other questions. The court. All right. Thank you, sir. You may step down. This concludes the testimony of Warden John Galipeau given at hearing on motion to suppress conducted July 31st, 2024 in this cause.
Wow. That is crazy.
Okay. I'm off here. I got to make supper.
All right. Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Reading.
No problem.
All right. Let's see what the comments are saying. Was there a question on the MWC? Like that. Are you comparing your notes? I've definitely got some improvements to make for the next time. Let's see. She says, mine aren't too shabby for a newbie. Good job. That's right. RA had control over the lights and it was a dimmer, not completely off. Yep. So he breaks his stuff. Dr. Walla gets his broken stuff replaced. Man, Dr. Loomis would never. Melissa, I'm not sure what your question is. Brian? Who's Brian? I think you're talking about the wrong case, girl. Yeah, I wasn't sure how many people I would have in here chatting, so I did put it on slow mode. Dude is basically saying Alan got boring to look at. No, incarceration is never good. But he was definitely getting treated with kid gloves a lot of the time. It sure sounds like it. Why didn't any of his attorneys bring up the Odinist guards threatening him? Yeah, that is a good point. Some people don't know what footnotes are. They don't see the documents. They're not used to them. Let's see. Wait, for Walla, they kept asking her about rec time, not her department job. Ah. Thanks for being here, Rescue. Enjoy your dinner party. Let's see here. Oh, Kohlberger. Okay. Yeah, that's wrong case. Hey, Sean, how you doing? Well, that was 84 pages. And it's crazy. Crazy, crazy. So what are everybody's thoughts on that testimony? Leave me a comment below. Thank you for coming. This is the first testimony today. I know that some other creators have lives later. But I'm going to try to get out one more tonight yet. And this time it will not be at 11:42 p.m. I promise. So I will decide when I'm going to do the next one and let you all know. Hope you enjoyed listening to that. Have a good evening. Thank you all on the prowl. I appreciate it. Bye, everyone. Yeah, he did stand strong. I agree. All right, everyone. Have a good night. I'm going to go get something to eat. Bye.